Welcome to this Transparently Signature Fireside chat. My name is SKillen. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Cloudsmith. And today we're going to be having a conversation with Luke Hinds, who is the co-founder and CTO at Stacklok. You may better know him. He's currently making waves with the announcement of Stacklok alongside Craig McLuckie of K8S fame. But you'll certainly know Luke from his background at Red Hat and, of course, projects like Sigstore and Keyline. He's also deeply invested in the security community, i.e. OpenSSF and things like that. So today we're going to talk about software supply chain and probably some of the journey of how Luke has got to where he's currently at in Stacklok and just some of the challenges that he's encountered along the way and how that ties up into the direction of software supply chain and where we're going to go with that. So with that, I'm going to welcome Luke into the conversation.
Hey Lee, good to see you.
Luke, welcome. So lots of things going on in the community, and you've got some exciting announcements which are pretty fresh.
Yeah, busy. Yeah, very much.
It'd probably be worthwhile. I mean, I can probably not do you justice in terms of like talking about background and what's going on. So maybe we could start off with something like maybe sharing your background and just how you started in the software industry, and that would be super interesting.
Yeah, of course. So I predominantly say I'm a software engineer, and I tend to develop code that builds security platforms. Okay, and I've been around security for, I guess, a good 15 or so, maybe pushing to 20 years. And I actually started in telecommunications networks. Okay, so originally I was at Nokia for a while, and then before that a startup. And so I had a fair amount of experience around trying to secure telco networks, okay, which was a lot of fun. I mean, we won't get into it now, but like SS7, those sort of protocols, and where there's absolutely no authentication at all, so hackers could go free reign. And yeah, so I did a lot of stuff around trying to sort of developed a PKI solution that would be used to sort of pull up IPsec tunnels to protect mobile telco connections from base stations back into an IP network. Did a lot of stuff around that space, and around that sort of time, open source started to really get some traction. So I've done various things around Linux for years. I mean, I've been a Linux user going back to the early part of this millennium, sorry, and yeah, but there was certain things like OpenStack was one of the first projects I think that I caught the wave on and started to develop a lot more security-based software. And yeah, and it's just sort of built from there, really. You know, I've been always been part of open source communities, and I'd love doing that. And you know, I still am an engineer. A lot of engineers do seem to burn out these days. You don't see many older guys, you know, and but I'm still here because I love it. You know, I kind of, you know, I still enjoy this. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't be doing it. But you know, I
mean, it's probably part of the incredible pace of how rapid change is occurring within the industry. You can see why people would burn out. It's a bit like, you know, the knowledge of being a doctor or a lawyer and having to keep up with, you know, all the changes and the advancements that are happening. And you know, certainly for us, whenever we raised the Series A at Cloudsmith, even between then and now, and that was 2021, huge shift in just the perception and awareness of security in the industry since then. But
very much.
I think your background's super interesting. Obviously, you were dealing with security, telecoms, secure. I mean, I think it's expected these days that security is a given, but that hasn't always been the case, you know. And I'm sort of like immediately, I'm sort of thinking when we're talking about securing telecoms, I'm thinking of the Kevin Mitnicks and, you know, Freakers and stuff of the early days of like, well, we can tap into this and tap into communications. And I think that was an obvious problem to solve. And I think at some point, you know, security in the industry, we're still really nascent in terms of like how much respect there is for it. Like people get freaked out and hear about like issues that happen out there. But I think only really now we're starting to gain a lot of traction. Unless obviously your journey into Stacklok is probably crystallizing just how important that is. This is a problem that needs to be solved at a scale. But I guess before we get to there, what pivotal moments do you think would have in your life, you know, because obviously you work in security and telecoms and right through to now, you have a background with Sigstore, which you're probably most well known for, I would say. But what are the pivotal moments you would say that you've encountered that brought you to software supply chain security beyond what you've said?
Yes. So my former employer was Red Hat. I spent quite a while at Red Hat, and Red Hat have been on the forefront of that for quite a while. I mean, the forefront, the battlefield, and the innovations of trying to sort of write a secure, widely used packaging system that consumes from many open source projects. So I'd been looking at that area for a while there, and a lot of other smart people as well. And so I, I think I kind of got ahead of the supply chain thing there, because going back 2 years ago, nobody was really, or maybe more than 2 years now, but nobody was really talking about secure supply chain. It wasn't really a word that was used. It was, there was this sort of series of events that all came together, and a label was needed, and we came up with secure supply chain. But yeah, really, I guess the entry to it has been that I've worked with cryptography for a while. I'm totally upfront. I'm no good with the mathematics of this stuff, but I've lots of experience implementing it. I've worked with X509 and different key algorithms for quite a while, and done a lot of work around public key infrastructure, PKI, and certificate authorities. And so I'd been around this space for quite a while and got a lot of experience with open source package managers, kind of contributing to them, consuming from them. And like I say, a lot of work done at Red Hat, although I didn't work particularly on the packaging system myself. I had a lot of experience packaging different open source projects and knowing what kind of is a sort of a stable project, what's likely to be accepted in an enterprise grade platform, what sort of things to look for around how well maintained it is, how secure the code base is. So I had a lot of prior art, really, up until the point that secure supply chain became a thing. And at the same time started ideating around Sigstore as well, and been thinking, originally plan was to implement leverage blockchain. So I was looking at different blockchain technologies and had this thing in my head of a secure supply chain ledger, this kind of, tamper resistant ledger for quite a while, and ideated on that and found a few other folks that were working on things. At the same time, I was working alongside Brandon Phillips. Folks might remember from CoreOS. He was in the same engineering team as myself, and he was doing some stuff as well with transparency logs. I was hitting a lot of problems with the blockchain stuff, so I kind of had a look at what he'd done and then realized, there's this back-end technology to what he was loading at the front end. So I started to develop around that. Later on, met Dan Lawrence and a few other people, and and Sigstore happened and blew up. Really, it's right project, big problem at the right time, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that awareness that we spoke about earlier, where people are only really starting to understand, like, why is things like traceability and verifiability and immutability are really important. So what we started with was that people built software and they're predominantly consumerists, like they're just consuming of the software. But now I think the thinking has shifted towards, but how did the software get to my laptop, my machine, my environments, and actually can I then prove, can I make sure that the software I'm using is the software that I think it is, and such things like that. So it is super important. And actually, just before we move on, you said something about mathematics, and I think that I've heard this quote before that math, you can teach a great mathematician programming fairly easily, but it's not so easy, and the vice versa. To teach mathematics to a program, and we can see why. It's a deeply difficult field as well.
Very much, and a lot of foot shooting opportunities.
for sure. And in fact, we probably got into trouble in our lifetime with people that think they know it deeply, implementing things, particularly within cryptography, and actually not having the right proofs to actually show that this is unbreakable, and it's not just a trivial cryptography that looks complex, but it's not doing its job.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, I think it would be quite interesting for us to maybe focus on that transition for you, because like myself, like I'm predominantly a developer, and the things that excite me is actually building value for other people, building software and figuring out how things work. But maybe just briefly explore that transition from the developer into the startup founder, and maybe then we can talk about, Stacklok, myself, Cloudsmith as well.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. So I think deep down, like any engineer, I've harbored this feeling for a while that what it would be like to do my own thing. Okay. I think that's probably a lot of engineers. I think that, you know, I mean, we might I've worked for some wonderful companies, but invariably you do hit junctures where you feel like, gah, if all these people weren't in the way, and I could just decide to do something, how cool would that be? Do you see what I mean? To be that master of your own destiny, so to say. And so I'd had the idea for quite a while, and but just would never really felt like it was the right time or the right position, you know. And I had thought about doing like consultancy gigs, because a lot of security folks can you know, it's a very in-demand skill, you know, and that's becoming more present every day. So I thought about doing that for a while, but I love building things. I mean, that's what I really enjoy doing is making something, and somebody somewhere might find it useful, and they find a novel way of using it, or they use it somehow. You know, I've always find that very, very satisfying. So I'd always had this idea of wanting to have my own company effectively, and I guess, you know, I did definitely benefit from the high profile exposure that a lot of projects that I've worked on have gained me. And there's Sigstore, but there's other things that I've done. There was, like I mentioned, there was OpenStack, so I led the security working group there. I was elected into that position, doing various things in the OpenSSF, like on the TAC, and recently been elected to the governing board as an independent contributor representative. So various bug bounty programs like Kubernetes. I was part of the security bug bounty program there. And so my name had been built up over the years, you know, just not intentionally, just from loving open source and wanting to contribute, and being enough of an idiot to say, yeah, I'll do that. Do you see what I mean? And put myself forward, really, you know. And you know, so that all sort of transpired, really, that I think that I got into the right position where basically lots of folks were asking me, when are you going to do a startup, Luke? You know, and then when I started hearing that a lot, I thought, that's a good question, you know. And so there were people that were receptive to this, and but I didn't have a co-founder, which is an important thing. Do you see what I mean? It's like, it's, you know, if anybody's thinking of going into something like this, you need a really strong partner, you know, somebody that you work with, you gel with, and for that journey, it's really important. I mean, if anybody's going to invest in your company, it's very rare they'll go for a solo founder, you know, just because the risks of, if that founder just loses it from stress or something, you know, you need a plan B, you need there to be more than one. So, you know, again, it was the right time. Events transpired, and I met Craig. We spent a lot of time getting to know each other, talking to each other. We both knew of our backgrounds, and we both knew that we had a lot of open source cred, so to say. And so we just spent a lot of time getting to know each other and ideating around this problem space. And it just so happens that my co-founder had also been ideating around secure supply chain for quite some time. It's a topic that was very close to their heart. And yeah, and so, you know, it was, the opportunity arose and presented itself, really. And you know, I was lucky that I had the ability to grab that and run with it, really, you know. But it's all very much, I have open source to thank for this. Do you see what I mean? It very much, you know, open source has really helped me elevate my career and got me to the position that somebody felt it's worthwhile doing something with this individual. And you see what I mean? Because my work is out there hanging on the washing line for all to see.
It's a super powered resume, right, or CV.
Yeah,
and in terms of like, this is your credibility in terms of what you've built, and it's not just credibility, it's passion as well.
Yeah,
you know,
100%. Yeah. I mean, this gets me out of bed in the morning. You know, it very much does. You know.
Yeah, and actually, you and I had spoken previously in previous conferences where we're basically talking about, it's that passion that drives us and should drive the community in terms of like how important this is. And I think that the bottom line was that certainly one of my goals is actually that education and awareness and acceptance in the community that this is of how important this is. And it could be something completely sounds really unimportant, you know, but if I'm a consumer of many different things in my personal life, and if you're trusting somewhere like your bank, and the bank suffers an extreme breach where your personal data is now being tapped into by someone else, like you would feel deeply, deeply unsatisfied, I think, with the utilization of that bank, and thinking, how could they have prevented that, or what should we have done better? If you knew that they had done their best and still it happened, well, you'd still be annoyed. But compared to if they had done nothing and didn't respect how important this is, I think that would be probably on the end of the lawsuit and class action.
Yeah, that's a very astute observation, Lee, because I think what we're doing around secure supply chain, there's a very much a human story to this. Okay, and a lot of open source software now is ingested into critical infrastructure. Okay,
yep.
So there are workloads that are running on open source software that we require be functional for our society to be able to operate as it does when we get up every day. And we take a lot of this stuff for granted because it's in the background. But it's harking back again to my telco days. We used to have this thing of 5 nines of availability, so extreme amounts of availability that have to be met. And if a vendor or a network doesn't meet those, they've got to do a full, they've got to write a full response to the government to make themselves accountable in most countries. And this was really where I learned around this whole idea of critical infrastructure and how much we rely on it. And so a good example could be hackers could take out a telecommunications network. Maybe an entire country's network. Now, generally, when something like that happens, people tend to lose their minds very quickly when they can't reach their loved ones. Do you see what I mean? If they're worried about their kid that's not being picked up from kindergarten, they will put another 20, 30 miles per hour over the speed limit to get there quickly, and things start to unwind very quickly. Do you see what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
You've got emergency services that are relying on that network, and we can cascade this to many, many other verticals where it's critical that these services are reliable, and they are under attack. They're under attack from nation state actors. We know that, as a matter of fact. You see what I mean? So this is more than just. That's what I like about this. It's more than we're just building cool APIs that do things. We're actually building things that can save lives effectively and protect our loved ones, because like I say, this infrastructure is so critical and key to our society's functioning,
And I would agree with that. That actually reminds me in terms of like articulating what it is that we do. And I think you and I are both now within that software supply chain space. But for years, even prior to achieving funding within Cloudsmith, we were always struggling with ways to articulate what it is we were doing if you weren't a developer in this space. So even taking my lovely wife, whenever I'm articulating what it is that we actually do, I've used quotes like that for the layperson to say, even though we're not directly we might not be directly powering, sort of medical critical infrastructure, but we're part of the chain to enable that. We're part of the chain to protect that. So you could say that you're saving lives. I know it sounds really silly and people will laugh when they hear that, but it really is that critical what we're doing, that you should have a respect for everything beyond just what it is you're building. How does it get used in the community? The things that you do, it has impact somewhere. Everybody's run the business, and if it's a business worth anything, then you have an impact upon other people. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a business, right? But it really just goes beyond just the financial aspects of we're making money or whatever else. It's like you're impacting people out there. So people out there just recognize that, I think, and that's fantastic. I was going to ask you to sort of like highlight some of the potential risks within the software supply chain. We've done that a little bit by saying, well, critical attacks on critical infrastructure, and even not, potential reputational disaster if you're lucky, right? And then potential, disclosure of details, or worse, that if someone's manipulating your life or your company based on the attacks that have happened. I mean, you could get really extreme in terms of the impact that such things have.
Sure. Yeah, very much. Yeah. And I think the fascinating thing is we've got a whole new ream of threat actors that are coming online now with with a generative AI essentially. It's completely ups the game to whole new levels. And I'm not just hyping the latest thing. It's not like I was talking about NFTs a few months ago. It's this is concerning stuff. I mean, I'm quite concerned around the social engineering impacts of this technology. I mean,
Yes.
it's very, I mean, nobody would really want to at the moment, perhaps, but it's quite trivial to write some text and have somebody analyze my voice. Okay. And then get it to generate me saying, hey, can you just, I'm going to send you an email. Can you just click on this link and then send me the token that it prints out, kind of, along those lines. It's you've got all these kind of easy ways of social engineering based attacks. Okay, and then there is also the kind of like the agent based prompt engineering. Okay, and you're aware of, like, there's this auto GTP. Okay?
Yes.
And it's basically it's just some Python code. It's shell wrapping.
Yeah.
And it's just you get these different agents talking to each other, so they all start prompting each other and going off and doing their own research and coming back, dumping the research into a text file, and then using that for a new prompt. And they kind of continue, and they go off and they do this autonomous research, And I've been playing around that with somebody at Stacklok, and we'd say, look, the prompt would be, I have a web server that's running on localhost 8080. I want to make sure it's secure. Can you work out how you would exploit this so that we can take preemptive actions so that we don't trigger any sort of protective system, if you see what I mean? And you see this thing, it starts doing research, and it goes, right, you've got a Java application, what CVs are available there? So it's doing a lot of searches using a headless browser, okay? And then it starts saying, hey, can I install Nmap on your machine? And you're like, well, yeah, sure, go ahead. So it's trying to work out what's your operating system. So it's okay. So you've got a Linux machine here, and then I need to use this package manager. So it starts using apt-get or DNF, and then it starts running Nmap scans, and it starts performing a penetration test. It's mapping out the network. It's working out what versions you've got. And I guess what I'm saying here really is script kiddies are going to hit a whole new level with this sort of stuff. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
It's the volume of attacks and how accessible attacks are. So, I mean, for us as engineers, AI is really cool because, we can get GPT to write our unit tests now. And if you're an engineer that knows what you're doing, you'll sort of be the arbiter around the quality, and you can generate your company logos. And there's lots of tools that really accelerate our productivity. Okay. But the same happens for the bad people as well. The black hats can leverage this as well to their heart's content, and so it's kind of up the whole game of cat and mouse a huge amount, and a lot of that's going to manifest in supply chain attacks. It's going to be a lot of developer identities that are compromised and all manner of stuff. So
I was going to say, like, that's exactly it. Like any advancement, it's going to be used for good and for bad, and ideally you would be outpaced the bad, right? And that's going to be particularly difficult to do. And it's actually frightening if you would imagine that, at some point, whenever you have, general AI and the capabilities it might be able to bring, just that it would be utilized for bad more than good. And it's just like, well, what do we do about that now, right? In terms of, like, if we don't do something, we're going to be in a really bad place, I think. And I think things like the traceability and the provenance things, where we have to really deeply understand and control. So understand, make it visible, and control what it is that we're actually utilizing. And people see advancements like you've said, the generative AI and things like Copilot and generating code. There's a lot of productivity gains to be had from that, but then people have to realize, okay, just like you said, other people are utilizing it for nefarious means. And I love the fact that you said script kiddies, because it's something I probably haven't really said too much in the past while, and certainly would have been a very common term in my IRC days. To say that,
exactly. It's quite an old term, isn't it? Script kiddies.
Yes, yeah.
But
we're really talking about someone who's like, maybe they've got a past interest. They're probably on the earlier stage of their journey in terms of like exploring computers, and they can just download things that would help them do broken into a system. And that would be very exciting if you're a young person exploring this here area. But now we're talking about there's just like very easily craftable exploits that an AI can generate for you, in the same way that you can go to ChatGPT and ask it to generate you some questions for an interview or something like that. Just generate me an exploit for X website or this particular domain and try it out. And that is frightening in itself, for sure.
Yeah, it's like I always say. I mean, in security, we have to try to be right every time. Whereas when you're an attacker, you can fail as many times as you want. You just got to be right once.
One time.
Yeah.
I'll not sleep tonight, Luke. Okay. I mean, that's amazing. One of the things we had for this Fireside chat, and I just thought it was an interesting link, is that we talked about the sort of the tea and coffee trade, and they had some advancements, I think, even before security and software. We were talking about that. And there was a bit of overlap with the tea and coffee trade with projects such as Sigstore and then transparency logs and just knowing the traceability of the consumer products. So I thought it was an interesting link because, whenever you think about things like fair trade, and what fair trade is that, in the conversation that we had privately before this, we're talking about traceability and recognition that whenever you're producing good coffee or good tea, you want to prove that comes from reputable farms. But it's, how do you actually do that? It's like, well, you have to put processes in place that if you want people to enjoy their fair trade tea or coffee, that you can actually show that this was derived from reputable places. And software is a lot like that. We can learn a lot from those trades in the use of software, as we've spoken earlier. And I think projects like Sigstore really furthered, the importance of actually showing, I've produced this artifact, i.e. the tea, perhaps. This is where it was produced. This is who it was produced by. This is how it got from the source, the origin, into my hands, and now I'm using it. And without that, I think in the protections controls that offers, it's not the whole answer, but it's part of it. Then we're going to be at risk if there is 90% of your open source that we're utilizing today is predominantly human-based. Imagine what it's going to be like whenever 90% of it is now AI generated. And you really have to put a lot more effort into understanding the source of the code that we're actually utilizing. So I think with that, we were sort of teasing Stacklok a little bit earlier, but we didn't get into it. I think it'd probably be a good place to sort of move into. We're talking about software supply chain and how that has an impact in today's world, and also a little bit about how you moved on from developer into a startup founder. But maybe just like focus a little bit again on that startup journey of the motivation of starting the startup, and just maybe talk about Stacklok and what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Sure. Yeah. So it's very new for us, and there's lots of ideation going on at the moment, trying to get good people in. Okay, so just starting to build the company. We, of course, will be active in the secure supply chain space, okay? And we want to sort of continue to support the communities, okay, and work with others. And one thing with this, one thing with this secure supply chain space, it's going to take a village to solve this issue. A single startup cannot do this on its own. Do you see what I mean? So we very much see ourselves continuing to support communities and be active parts of communities, and when we can, default to being open, and use an open source to solve these issues. So like I say, I think really our initial focus is what can have a tangible impact and what is low hanging. Okay, so that's the real approach that we're taking initially. Okay, what are some very useful things where the work that's required is as seamless as possible to implement that. Okay, now Sigstore's been a good example of that. Okay, there's a lot of automation around Sigstore, and but yeah, we really want to sort of meet companies where they're at the moment and make things that and build things that can enact credible change for them very quickly. Okay, so I mean, I'm somebody I've got a background in sort of deep silicon based attestation of, to a hardware root and having cryptography everywhere, and I realize really from talking to a lot of customers, they're not really at that level. I mean, that's definitely stuff that we have to crack and have right, but a lot of folks like they don't even have a modern software development lifecycle. Okay, and I think this is one of the things that Salsa did very well, which is, the level one of like, do you even have a CI? Do you have a makefile? Do you see what I mean? Because it's like, I remember when going back to my previous career, one of the first solutions I built, we used a Microsoft X. I shouldn't really talk about this in public because it's embarrassing, not because I'm in any confidentiality. We had an Excel spreadsheet which you would put values in, like port, host name, and then you'd hit a macro button, which would call a Perl script, which would put all of those values into a Unix config file, which you'd then use to deploy this huge, really important system. Do you see what I mean? And so a lot of folks still have that as their build environment, stuff like that. They're using Perl scripts, and and so like to come back onto the topic, we're looking at what can we do that will provide an immediate benefit to folks. Okay, and we are of course also starting to look quite seriously at data science. We're bringing in a few folks, somebody that I've worked with before that's incredibly experienced in this area around anomaly detection in huge volumes of traffic, and so we're looking at what we can leverage there, but it has to be meaningful. It's got to be something that's not suggestive or could possibly be right. It's got to be something that's determined and useful, and we'll continue to support Sigstore, of course, and help that community grow and evolve, and and continue to innovate. But it's a little too early yet to say we're going to do a specific thing. We're at the moment we're building the company, and me and Craig are the janitors. We're doing all the all the day-to-day, all the kind of the non-fun stuff really that needs to be doing. But we got some really good smart folks coming in, and then we'll start to ideate and really knuckle down on things that we want to pursue. That makes sense. So it's not. I'm not kind of trying to be a Machiavellian and hide what we're doing. It's very early days for us, but we're super excited, for what we can build and what we can do. And we're building a lot of things as well, but we need to kick the tires with them and see if they're useful to folks as well.
And I think that, if you were an unknown founder in an unknown industry, people would be like, well, I'm not sure what he means there. But whenever you're talking about it, and it's Luke of Sigstore fame, and there's Red Hat and everything else that you work with in the OpenSSF and beyond, it's going to be good, I think. And I think that this is such a broad area that if we can do anything to accelerate the capability of companies out there, it is necessary to be able to tackle the scale of the problem that we've got.
Sure.
And like even talking about the data, like obviously at Cloudsmith, we're an artifact management software as a service, and Salsa itself talks about, like, Salsa stands for supply chain levels for software artifacts. So it's very artifact centric. I think a lot of people don't really recognize just how important that is, and it's about the building the thing and everything that connects to that. But one of the things that we try to do is that we always talked about secure by design or secure by default. I'm actually thinking we should say Salsa by default, but I don't want to sort of encroach. But we do talk about Salsa and how it taps into that, because like as part of the compliance levels of Salsa, it does talk about utilizing other technology to help with what you're trying to do. It's essentially impossible, I think, at any level of scale to do everything yourself as a company, and you should be leaning upon best practices and best tooling in order to do it. Like otherwise, it's just we have to scale beyond like the humans that we've got within it.
Yeah,
and you
very
want
much.
to do it in a way that's repeatable, reproducible, and reliable as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so I can totally see like the opportunity that is there, tapping into data and elevating signals that are within that in terms of the supply chain and how we use that. You know, I
Sure.
know that even for our customers at Cloudsmith, the data that we're elevating for them would be stuff that perhaps wouldn't be very visible to them directly. And so we're providing them here's an additional tap of information. And if you could do something to highlight any signal for there as well, because you can take a feed of information, but unless you're going through it with a fine-tooth comb, it's probably quite difficult to actually understand what's important versus what's not, what's an outlier versus what's normal.
Yeah.
You know, so I totally believe
yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's one thing with this whole gig really is we you can't have I'm just trying to remember what's the opposite of a false positive. A
positive.
So effectively, I mean, what I mean here is just had a brain fart for a moment and couldn't remember the word, but we can highlight. You know, you can have a false positive, which is essentially something says something's vulnerable. It turns out it's not vulnerable. It's noise. Okay, so that's a whole topic we could get onto. You know, exploitability and SBOM and VEX and so forth. But the other thing is where it says everything's okay and it's not okay.
So false negative. In other words, it's like, yes.
I don't know why it's so hard for me to articulate and remember that term.
I think it's the double inversion, right? It's the not false. Yeah. You know,
that is the problematic area really at the moment with people leveraging AI. Is, you know, AI can hallucinate, it can get things wrong, and it can, you know, and so we're doing a lot of research around that area at the moment. You know, we're looking at what data sources we can train against, and but we're mindful that there's a lot of responsibility. If we do find something and we put something out, we're very mindful of the impact. I said on a recent podcast, there's no shades of grey in security. A lot of people pulled me up about it. But that was essentially what I meant. Do you see what I mean? If you say everything's okay and it's not okay, that's extremely bad. Do you see what I mean? That's a scenario that we cannot entertain. You see what I mean?
Yeah, because that invites, I was going to say incompetence, that's not the right word, but complacence. You know, it's like if you're told that everything's fine and it really isn't, maybe you won't look quite as hard the next time that this occurs. And, you know, just like you said earlier, it only takes that one breach, and then no matter how long it took to get there, but it just takes that one breach, and you know, you're compromised. And I think that we really have to make sure that we're elevating just like the signal, and also just like you said, being able to say like what's the confidence level of this as well. You know, so I think that is not an easy problem to solve, and I know that there's many, I think, players out there that are trying to build solutions for this, but like you said, it's going to take a village to build it. And what you mean by that is like no one company alone, regardless of size, like, you know, the Google and Apples and the GitHubs of the world, all fantastic people in the industry and helping further, but it's not enough. You know, and I think we'll have to put significant effort together as a community, because people will bring different aspects and different bias and different inputs into that. And I'm sure, like you said, we will start to lean ourselves into the generative AI for our purposes, whether just to understand it better or to lean on it as a tooling that we can do stuff that just wouldn't be possible as individuals as well.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much. And I mean, that's one of the things that I kind of been raised on in my career from working in open source for quite a while, is collaborating alongside your competitors. You know, that's a very common scenario, really, where you agree we're going to have an open set of interfaces. Okay, you know, it's ideas are based on meritocracy. The best ideas win. We review. Do you see what I mean? There's a consensus, and so that conduit is just incredibly good for tackling a very large problem like secure supply chain security. Really, is you've got a really good framework where people that would typically be competing against each other can collaborate together instead, you know, and that's where open source is so valuable for these large problematic areas. Yeah.
And that's super important, and it actually makes me think of a comic strip that I particularly like, which a lot of people are familiar with, but it's XKCD, and and one of the strips, and it's a very famous one because I think it's been shown many times. There's even one on the Salsa page, I believe. But it basically talks about like if there were 16 standards and no one's doing this, what we need is a unified way of doing it. And then the end result is now there's 17 standards.
Sure.
But the point is that's if you do not collaborate. That's if you're doing one thing alone, and we're not going to build something we can share both in terms of interchange.
Sure.
Because if there's so many sources of data out there that we have to tap into and analyze and communicate with each other, if we don't have a common interchange between those, it's going to be very difficult in order to build those things. So I think that like APIs and interchange formats, I agree that they're like critical for us to be able to do this at any level of scale. And that's why I like frameworks like Salsa and Co as well, that basically are talking about the tooling and sort of imply that, it's like, without standards, it would be very hard to easily integrate with those other tools and technologies and services. Yeah. And so one of the things I was going to ask is about the significant hurdles of building, but you're not quite there yet, but I could speak for myself, and, there will always be hurdles, right, in building. And I think that, doing anything at scale is not going to be an easy thing to do. And I can attest for ourselves that certainly it's not easy running or building startups, but it's incredibly exciting. But there are many hurdles that people wouldn't really imagine, so just for the benefit of the viewers, it's like, it sounds really easy. You just start a company and you go, and certainly it could be like that, but it probably ignores a lot of the difficulties that people might encounter in terms of like things like funding and actually like the hiring. And it's all about people, right? So whenever you're building any company, you just can't do it alone. And I think you're starting to scale out that initial team. Has it been difficult for you to find people or to scale the hiring?
No, it's actually been very easy. It's been very easy. I mean, there's a lot of folks that I've worked with before. Okay, so I've got a big network. As has Craig got a huge network, and it's actually been, finding people has been easy. It's just making sure we get the right people. I think that's a critical thing. So I mean, I don't really feel I can give advice around starting companies, because I'm a toddler, really. But I think one thing that's become apparent to me is being very careful you get the right people involved. Now, that doesn't say that there's right or wrong people, okay? But there are right people for you to work with, people that are culturally close to you. Do you see what I mean? You have strengths and weaknesses that can interplay very well, okay? And that's the thing that we've been focused on, really, is building a kind of a really good culture from the onset, and bringing in folks that are incredibly talented, but will allow us to have a company that reflects who we are, and who we want to be, essentially. That's been very important. And I think the other thing for ourselves is it's different times now. We live in very, very different times. So if you look back to sort of 2020, 21, I mean, things were very different then. Money was a lot cheaper. Do you see what I mean? There was a lot of it swilling around. And obviously it's very different now. And we've been born into these lean times, And so myself and Craig, we often joke that we're not trying to be a unicorn. We want to be a camel, okay, which means that we are durable and we can go the distance through the desert. Do you see what I mean? So we don't want to just hire the world or anybody that looks remotely good. We've been very selective around who we hire, and we're trying to build a company that will last the long time, will last the duration. So I have a lot of respect for you folks, because you've been through several cycles. You built this thing yourself, and that's it really. Is our the hiring has not been difficult around the numbers, because I mean, obviously with the industry as it is, there are a lot of people looking for work right now. There's been a lot of layoffs. So when we opened our careers page, we got 170 applications in just a couple of days. So it's just a crazy amount of volume of people looking for work, really. And but yeah, I mean, to risk repeating myself, really, it's about, for us, it's just getting good people on, getting the right people in, and then trying to work out how we can support them be the best version of themselves. Do you see what I mean? So that they can ideate, be creative, and innovate and build exciting software.
And I think we said it earlier on, but finding those people that you work with that have the same passion, that share the vision of what you're trying to build, and I think it's really, really important that if the community and companies are going to trust us with software supply chain and helping them with that, you could better believe that they want us to be passionate about it. Because if you're not, like, that's not really a vote of confidence that was like, well, I'm only doing it because it's a company. It needs to be much more than that. So even having calls with our own customers and talking about like their issues that they're facing, that they want to see the passion that you really deeply care about this, and we do. And I think the community is pretty good within security, and I think a lot of the people have been attracted by the problems that are here and want to pitch in problems. So I think we're actually quite spoiled and privileged in terms of like the capability and the passion that are people within it.
Very much, yeah. It's got vastly better over the past few years. I mean, I was very much used to being a security person, being a kind of a third-class citizen, really. You were very much the afterthought. You were the people that broke everything and got in the way, and you were troublesome, and you never felt part of the conversation, And I think thanks to modern development approaches, continuous integration, DevOps and so forth, we've started to become more of a first-class citizen, and can be an early influence. I mean, we always used to joke in Red Hat about SE Linux. Okay, so everybody, as soon as you gave a developer a Linux operating system, they would disable SE Linux because it would block their network, it would block this, it would block that. Do you see what I mean? And then eventually there would be this SE Linux debt that you'd kind of get to production, and then somebody's got to switch it on, and they would switch it on, and then the whole application would just shut down and not operate. Do you see what I mean? And so I think in a lot of ways, we've managed to kind of claw our way up the chain and become early influencers in software architecture, scanning, provenance checks, all of this sort of stuff. So it's got vastly better over the past few years since I started in this area.
And I mean, I know that's one of the motions out there, and it's being repeated a lot, and I think it's probably an overloaded term, but they talk about the shift left of security, and really what they're talking about there is that respect to have it earlier in the development processes, and not as an afterthought. It really needs to be baked in. So I think we had like this renaissance of change when it came with, like, and I hate like throwing terms like because people use them all the time, but like the DevOps thing of bringing development operations closer, being able to deploy it in the same way and treat that in the same way that we build the software. And security is exactly the same. And again, I don't really like the term DevSecOps, but at least I appreciate it's about trying to onboard that and embed that as part of the processes. In fact, I was reading one of the books recently, which you're probably familiar with, but it was the follow-up to the Phoenix Project. It was the Unicorn Project, and in that, the security people were initially painted as the bad people. It was like, here's the people that stop the fun, here's the people that come in and sort of like block releases, and I think that it really just highlights, once they got beyond that, just the friction that it is introduced whenever you treat people like that as some other department to please, rather than being embedded with just the actual process of building. And this is a really important insight to think for anybody that's listening to this, thinking, maybe I'm not doing that today. It's like, how can I actually reduce that friction and think and appreciate development, operations, and security as part of the pipeline, just so that it should be an easy tick by the time you get to release it, and you can improve, i.e. Salsa, for example, just exactly the effort that you've put into building that artifact, that you can attest to its security.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much. And there's a lot to grow still as well. There's a lot of growth we have. I mean, the attrition rate for CISOs, CISOs is huge. Those folks it's a thankless task a lot of the time. So next time you see your CISO, show them some love, because they certainly need it. It's a tough role because you're having to convince people to allocate budget towards something where they don't see an immediate outcome. It's like if a budget goes to an engineering department that creates something, can then be rendered as having a value to your market. It can be a feature. It can be a new source of revenue. It, can diversify your market and so forth. But security doesn't always have that tangible outcome at the end that's directly mappable to a customer. You see what I mean? So they have to constantly grapple for budget. But at the same time, the consequences of them not covering their bases are huge, because a security incident brings with it huge brand damage as well. I mean, it can really impact your brand immensely. So there's a lot to improve still.
And that's, I was going to ask about perhaps next about insights in the software supply chain and potential impact industry. You're covering that a little bit, where good security in the past, or maybe lucky security, they got lucky, is that you don't hear about it, but actually there's a path there. And I think we've heard about this in like public legislation about being able to have to prove like how compliant you are with different frameworks. Like you see it in like ISO and standards, and there's going to be additional things added on top of that. It's like, can I attest as a company that I'm treating this with the appropriate, controls? And you would have to be able to prove that to other customers, whether that's via certifications or just reports. So I think that the way that we're going is that if you're a consumer of software, regardless of what level in the chain you are, you're probably going to only want to do business with other companies that are compliant in the different ways, that and they can prove that they've implemented these controls. And that's maybe one of the insights that I think that I would want to share, because we're in conversations with people. I'm sure you are too. Just that it's more than just doing. You have to be able to prove as well, and be verified with it. But is there any other things that you can think of, like that, in terms of like software supply chain and the impact in the industry, that's worth talking about, or perhaps best practices that you think today and maybe next step organizations should be thinking about and implementing?
Yes. So around implementing, I mean, like I said earlier, that there's some really good pragmatic first steps that you can take to vastly improve your supply chain security. It's I would, if an organization was to sort of consult me without in any capacity as an open source person or the Stacklok CTO, what can they do? There's some immediate things you can do around, looking at how you're handling your secrets. Okay. Token leakage is such a huge issue still, and we don't have a credible answer to that at the moment. Long-lived tokens are highly problematic, and those leaking or being leaked through, like I say, through phishing attacks, And so there's a lot of simple stuff that can be done there, really, around just modernizing your software development approach that you have at present, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and like for ephemeral tokens, and I think that's probably why the drum is being buying quite heavily for OIDC, so OpenIDC Connect, in terms of like how can we disconnect a little bit the point of use from the token that was authenticating and make it short term and short lived. Not always easy to do, because the whole industry hasn't really fully tapped into it. But I can certainly say for ourselves, it's something that's really important, and we've actually released some functionality. And I think that will be like, there's things that we will do that be well-known risks that we want to try and mitigate. And that's definitely one of the biggest ones.
Sure, very much, yeah. And I think that the problem here is a lot of us are reliant upon the large cloud enterprise providers changing their systems so that they can facilitate these ephemeral token life cycles and so forth. It's a key thing as well.
It's interesting in the shared responsibility model that, if you're utilizing the cloud provider, they do a lot for you, right? But there's also the risk that if you lean on that too much and expect them to do everything, then you can be complacent as well. So you still need to secure your own infrastructure that runs within the cloud, right?
And I mean, in their favor, they've done a lot. They've provided a very rich set of APIs. If you look at the various cloud providers, Azure, GCP, AWS, of course, very rich set of APIs. GitHub are incredibly good for providing a rich set of APIs for third-party integrations. So they've done a lot. They've done a lot to sort of to facilitate this.
Fantastic, and I'm being reminded we're almost out of time, Luke. As
Sure.
as per usual, when we're talking through it, it's very, very easy to burn through the time and
Yes.
realize I've been speaking for 50 minutes straight. Is there any final takeaways you want to offer for the audience?
Very good question. I would just say that if anything, if folks have got a read on me from this, I like to think I'm an approachable person. So, if you have a problem that you think you have a solution to, and you want to bounce that off somebody, I'm always receptive to do that. If you want to get an introduction to a community that I'm part of, reach out to me. If you want to follow what we're doing at stacklok.com, hit our website. You can sign up for a list that we will be maintaining to give updates of what we're doing, and watch this space as well. I mean, we've got a GitHub org. There's not much there at the moment, but you'll see more and more things appearing there over time as well. So,
well, that's incredibly exciting. I mean, I cannot wait personally to learn more, and I know that there's going to be a follow-up to this at some point, and we can dive a little bit deeper into what it is you're doing. You can tell us everything that's going on. I look forward to that. But thank you very much for your time, Luke. I really, really enjoyed it, and shorter than I would have liked it to be, I think. But yes, as Luke said, I would encourage everybody to remain connected with Luke here at Stacklok, or myself as well. As we talked about earlier, this is about people, this is about community. It will take the village to tackle the problems that are here. It's not going to be about one individual or company alone. So please follow us, both Luke and myself, Cloudsmith and Stacklok, to learn more about software supply chain security and see where we go with it. But thank you very much again, Luke. And thank you, everybody else. Thank you. And also for everyone else watching the feed. So I'm going to wrap it up now, and we can hand it back to Alan. Thank you.